All right, I think it is recording. Thank you for joining the webinar. This is the Woodland Owner Webinar Series hosted by My St. Croix Woods, a program of the St. Croix River Association. My name is Nikki Hanger and I am the Forestry Program Coordinator. The My St. Croix Woods program is a partnership of multiple public and private organizations throughout the watershed whose goal is to provide landowners with the resources and tools to make the best decisions on their land. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to take a few moments to talk about the Zoom software. Please leave your camera off and remain on mute for the entire webinar. You can type your questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Just click on that and it should pop up. We will answer questions after both presentations, but feel free to type them throughout the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be sent out in the next few days. I also have a survey that's in the chat box, and I'm also going to put it in the chat box again. So please fill out this survey to help us determine future webinar topics and how we are doing. So today's topic will be about agroforestry, but before I introduce our two great speakers, I wanted to highlight an upcoming conference. So the 2021 virtual conference will be held on March 12th, which is a Friday, and will include topics such as climate change, invasive jumping worms, forest pollinators, and much more. Registration is now open and the event will be $40 with opportunity for continuing education credits. We won't be having a Woodland Owner webinar series in March. Instead, it will be the conference. So our first speaker today will be Gary Wyatt, who is an agroforestry extension educator and extension professor with the University of Minnesota Extension in the regional office of Mankato. Gary has over 36 years of extension experience in Minnesota and promotes sustainable agroforestry practices that are economical and protect our soil, water, wildlife, and natural resources. Today, he will be talking to you all about agroforestry and what it is and landowner funding sources. So I will stop sharing my screen and let Gary go ahead and start sharing his.
Okay. Let's see, I think this is the right one here. There, Nikki, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can, and I can hear you fine.
Oh, good. Great, thanks for inviting us. I'm glad to have Eric as part of this webinar series on agroforestry, and he'll be talking about funding sources for agroforestry practices. So agroforestry, what is it, and the landowner funding sources? Let's get started. So what is agroforestry? Certainly agroforestry is the melting and together of agriculture and forestry. So it's developing working trees with agriculture. And obviously there's 5 practices of agroforestry: the intentional combining of agriculture and working trees to create sustainable farming systems. So of the 5 practices in Minnesota, we probably have the most recognizable one is windbreaks. And then next, riparian forest buffers, possibly forest farming, silvopasture, and alley cropping. So we're going to talk about each one of these agroforestry practices today. So the history of agroforestry is not new. It may be new to the Midwest, but it's not new to the world. Agroforestry has been used in many cultures and citizenships around the world for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Here's a silvopasture system in Spain. Oak and cork trees, they graze livestock, including cattle and hogs underneath these particular environments. Actually, I think they sell hog or hams with acorn type of value added properties in the hams and meats that they sell. So certainly we look at forestry and agriculture. If you talk about these two experts, they don't want to mix the two. Obviously in forestry, let's say silvopasture, we don't want cattle in the woods. Or in alley cropping, we don't want to mix trees with pastures or alleys of trees. But yet that can be a sustainable practice if used and practiced wisely. So we need to look at those opportunities. And actually with climate change, we think agroforestry really plays a futuristic role in many of our agricultural and forestry operations. So putting the right plant in the right place for the right purpose. Again, agroforestry is 5 practices: windbreaks, silvopasture, riparian forest buffers, forest farming, and alley cropping. Let's start with windbreaks. Planting a single or multiple rows of trees or shrubs that redirect or modify the wind and are established by one or more environmental purposes. So I'll just go around the pictures here. Windbreaks, there's field windbreaks. Down below, there's livestock windbreaks, windbreaks for livestock confinement yards and feedlots. Also, we have community windbreaks, and we have farmstead shelter belts. We can actually have a windbreak, or living snow fence is a windbreak. And certainly we use those in the snow belts, snow states in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and any snow state usually has living snow fences. And we also have windbreaks protecting valuable specialty crops for microclimate type developments. Windbreak benefits: reduce energy costs, green unsightly areas, reduce erosion and pesticide drift, protect plants, manage snow, improve irrigation use, increase crop yields, shelter livestock, mitigate odors and dust, provide wildlife habitat, enhance aesthetics, and carbon sequestration. Certainly all of these are benefits of windbreaks. This is a study done by Court out of Canada in 1988. We've tried to do some of these replicated studies with our modern combines with yield monitors, and they do show some of this bell curve effect on yield away from windbreaks. Certainly we see a lower yield near the windbreaks, but a bump in yield of the field average of about 10, well, probably 5 to 10H times the height of the planting. So we look at corn is 12%, soybeans 13%, barley was 25%, winter wheat was 23%, spring wheat 8%, and hay was 20% in this Court study out of Canada in 1988. So we have noticed some yield increases due to windbreaks, depending on soil types and topography of your land. There's been various studies on windbreaks and how it mitigates wind and also odors of livestock areas and confinement buildings and so forth. So it does affect the odor direction that you can see downwind. So windbreaks are being used in poultry and swine and livestock facilities, feedlots for cattle, etc., just to mitigate odors. Height and density of windbreaks determines the storage capacity of a snow fence or windbreak. So if you look at these diagrams, we're not going to go through each one of them, but if you think about snow and snow drifting, these bell curves after the windbreak on the leeward side is showing what the snow catch might be with these particular snow fences. Certainly a single fence or a single row of plants is not going to catch a lot of snow, but you will notice that there is on the windward side some snow catch, actually 10H, H being the height of the planting, and then 25H to 35H on the leeward side or the downwind side of the planting that will catch snow and be a protected area. You'll notice in the center screen where we have a single planted deciduous tree, there's not a lot of protection there because of the lower limbs not being present in those deciduous trees. So we want some type of conifer that's low to the ground, like spruce trees or shrubs that are low to the ground to catch the snow at the base of the plant and then causing drifting afterwards. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a snow catch planting right before a major planting of a windbreak. And that's a really good idea if you're looking at major snow or a large area that's drifting in from an area that's not protected from the north and northwest winds. And that gives you some added protection of a snowdrift area right before the major windbreak is planted. There's various plantings types and designs of windbreaks. Usually we have shrubs on the outer windward side, and then deciduous trees. In some areas that are not snow states, you can have conifer trees on the outside, but you don't want conifers right next to the shrub row that's going to be drifting onto the landscape. So in this particular area here, this is a picture taken just down the road from where I live in Minnesota. This is my neighbor, and this is an open cornfield to the north. This is a highway north and south. So you see the first catch of snow is that shrub row or two shrub rows and then deciduous trees. And then on the inside of his building site, he has spruce trees or conifers that are further protecting the inside of the landscape and of the farm site. This particular example is really interesting that this person planted those coniferous trees, I would assume, spruce trees on the north or west side of his new house, and then decided that, the first winter, maybe that wasn't enough. He needed a little bit more because the snow drifted right in front of his driveway, and right in front of the garage door, right in front of the house. And he extended that red snow fence. And then obviously you see those little green dots being the extension of the windbreak. So it's very important to understand how wind and windbreaks work, and that there is an edge effect on these plantings. So we're recommending usually 150 feet away from the roadway for living snow fences or a building site that the snow fences will protect. Forest farming is another agroforestry practice. The intentional manipulation, integration, and intensive management of woodlands under a managed forest canopy to produce non-timber forest products. Here we have maple syrup, we have shiitake mushrooms or other mushrooms that can be grown on logs, and other medicinals that can be managed under the forest, such as ginseng. Forest farming benefits can improve economic value of existing forests, diversify income, family lifestyle values, cultural, social connections. It doesn't have to make money. You don't have to sell it necessarily, but it might be a family gathering, a family value that you do use non-timber forest products off your landscape and off your property. Here we have morel mushrooms, also firewood, and then again, maple syrup production. Forest farming products are timber plus non-timber forest products, which could be medicinals, handicrafts, decoratives, food products. And here we have around the pictures again, mushrooms being produced by logs in the woods, also in the shade of the woods. Also, we have bed willows or other willow sticks or walking sticks being created, handicrafts. There's many medicinals that can be grown in woodlands in your area, depending on the native medicinals that grow there naturally that you can enhance. Also, we have a lot of decoratives that can be marketed to flower markets and so forth. Here's rhodosier dogwoods, and there's yellow dogwoods, and also curly willows that can be planted around the edges of woodlands and can enhance your lifestyle. And at the end here, we have chestnuts roasting over an open fire. How about that? So what to harvest or grow? Certainly you want to look at what's natively growing in your environment, your woodlands, economic value with ready markets if you're wanting to sell these products, associated with the understory, ground cover, herbs, shrubs, and trees, easy to grow or cultivate. Native, certainly we want to encourage. Traditional use, underutilized novelty items could be of sale or sellable items. Cultural or social interest might enhance some type of value-added marketable traits. So here we have especially forest products under foods, medicinals, and decoratives, just to list a few. There's a movement in the United States and Eastern United States and all the way to Minnesota here to develop a chestnut that's resistant to the blight. Hazelnuts, there's a strong group of individuals, both in the Midwest here, Minnesota, Wisconsin, working on hazelnuts, syrup, mushrooms, medicinals, black cohosh, ginseng, golden seal, witch hazel, just to mention a few. And then decoratives, bittersweet, not oriental bittersweet. Oriental bittersweet is invasive, certainly, but we do have American bittersweet can be grown. And then red twig dogwood is other dogwoods certainly can be a decorative. Forsythia, corkscrew willow, and other plants that could be decoratives. Wanted to highlight a food forest term, the food forest term, community food forest. Here's at Laverne, Minnesota, that started on a private property. It could be private or public property, even towns that have landscapes that are just being mowed. Some community volunteers, master naturalists, master gardeners are developing these areas that might be publicly owned by the city and developing some type of woody productive garden with woodies producing fruits and nuts. So here we have an apple tree orchard on this particular property being fenced for deer and rabbit protection in Laverne. And it's kind of related to the forest food or forest farming type practice with agroforestry. And here's at the north end of the property, we're looking at currants and hazelnuts, and aronia berry, which is black chokeberry, also a nanny berry. We have honeyberries planted in this location. A lot of different woody plants that are perennial fruit and nut type producers that will benefit this community. It's right beside a walking path that goes north of the a town into a state park in Minnesota, and it's close to Sioux Falls. But these are becoming more popular in cities. And actually, this is, like I said, a private property person that wanted to do something for the community, and it's working very well. And we can plant edibles on almost any agroforestry practice. Here's an edible windbreak. How about that? Saskatoons or Juneberries, serviceberries, Nanking cherry. We can have crab apples. We can have apple trees even planted in these areas. Aronia berries listed here. And then you could have actually some medicinals planted in these windbreaks as well. And you could have an edible riparian forest buffer. Here in this particular example, they have hazelnuts and aronia berry, black walnut as being a tree, elderberries, etc. Let's move on to alley cropping. So growing an annual or perennial crop simultaneously with a long-term tree crop. The agricultural crop generates annual income, while the longer tree crop matures and matures for a longevity or longer-term income. So here we have examples of black walnut and forage, and then oak and wheat. So we have an alley crop in between two major type of woody plants, tree plants. So alley cropping benefits the diversify farm enterprise, reduce erosion, improve water quality, protect crops, improve utilization of nutrients, enhance wildlife habitat, improve aesthetics, and store carbon sequestration. And there might be carbon credits available for landowners in the future that could be ecosystem services and maybe include more water quality credits or some type of air quality credits too, eventually. So here we have some examples of alley cropping systems and examples around the world, actually. Black walnut and soybeans, which could be a Midwest type of planting. Black walnut and forages for hay and grazing, could be a silvopasture alley cropping. Hazelnut, hybrid poplar, and pumpkin. And then black walnut and asparagus. Asparagus is a great perennial crop for alley cropping systems. Here are the biomass plantings. Here we have hybrid willow along with grasses that can be baled and used for bioenergy and biomass. And then we have hybrid poplar being the tree crop, and then the alley crop being willow in this particular example in this photograph at the lower right. So potential tree crop or tree shrub species that could be on the edge of the alleys. Walnuts, hybrid poplar, chestnut, pines, poplars, oak trees. Pines are utilized in the southern United States, the southeastern United States pretty properly. Walnut, Saskatoon, willow, hazelnut. You could actually have shrubs being the tree crop, and willows, choke cherries, high bush cranberry, currants, elderberry, Saskatoon. All these woody perennials could be the crop tree, if you will, bordering the alleys. And the alleyway crops could include our traditional corn, soybean crop, milo, wheat, some perennial or semi-perennial 5-year rotation would be legumes and hay, grasses, and so forth. Specialty crops, vegetables, like we mentioned before, asparagus, fruits, flowers, medicinals that might be longer term crops in between in the alleys, in between the tree crops, and then biomass energy crops as well. Riparian forest buffers. Riparian forest buffers are natural or planted woodlands adjacent to water bodies. They are designed with trees, shrubs, and grasses to protect water resources from non-point source pollution. So usually there's like a 3-zone type of diagram showing the different zones, planting zones of riparian forest buffers. Usually there's a grass zone, native grasses planted next to the crop, and then we have a shrub zone and then a taller tree zone closer to the waterway. This particular example is the Bear Creek example in Iowa. It's central Iowa. I think Iowa State University has done a lot of studies on this. If you just Google search Bear Creek Riparian Forest Buffer, I think you'll find out lots of information, and through the Iowa State University website as well. It's a 4-year-old riparian forest buffer. They have trees on the inside of the buffer next to the waterway. It looks like they also have some native grasses maybe on that buffer as well. And then they have shrubs and then native grasses toward the crop edge of the riparian forest buffer. So some of the benefits or goals would be to create a wildlife habitat and establish wildlife corridors. Certainly we want to reduce existing amounts or excessive amounts of sediment, organic matter, nutrients, and pesticides in surface runoff. And we want to provide a harvestable crop of timber, fiber, forage, fruit, or other crops depending on the landowner's goals. Some other benefits and goals would be to prevent scour erosion in the floodplain, restore natural riparian plant communities, increase carbon storage in the plant biomass and soils, and also cool the stream for maybe the habitat of trout in some of the trout streams that we have in the Midwest. We did plant at the Laverne site of the food forest. We did have an opportunity that this particular landowner had a riparian forest buffer, riparian buffer that wasn't planted to trees. And we actually planted productive edibles at this location too as a demonstration site. So in Minnesota, we have a buffer law from our Governor Dayton's period. And that was several years ago in 2018, I believe, or actually earlier than that. So if you're living next to a ditch, if we have cropland next to a ditch, it's 16.5-foot buffer. If you're cropping corn or soybeans or whatever crops near a waterway or like a river or creek or stream, then it's a 50-foot buffer. So we did an example of a 1-row planting of edibles and then a 4-row planting of edibles for those buffers. And we planted American plum, American cranberry, Nanking cherry, black chokeberry, which is a Roni berry, American hazelnut, elderberry, Juneberry, Saskatoons, and service berries, all kind of synonymous there, and then honeyberry. So we planted that in this location. Obviously, we used weed mats, and we planted the smaller shrubs that needed protection from deer and rabbits. So we did some chicken wire work. And then the first year we had hazelnuts and actually elderberry. So it worked out really well. Silvopasture is our next agroforestry practice that we're going to talk about. Combines timber, livestock, and forage production on the same acreage. Trees provide longer-term returns while livestock generate an income. Silvopasture benefits improve plant vigor, lower animal stress, reduce wildfire risk, improve wildlife habitat, annual income with grazing, hay, and pine straw hunting, etc. Long-term income with the timber and the crop trees that are valuable there. Many of these pictures are from the south, and we have a lot of pine plantations that have started out with silvopasture, and then they thin down and they open up the pasture for more livestock production. So what silvopasture is not? Grazing unmanaged woodlands is not a silvopasture practice. And 1 or 2 trees in a pasture is not a silvopasture practice. So silvopasture can be established by 2 ways. Certainly you can plant trees in an open pasture, which a lot of people probably don't like, but it's a great idea to plant top value trees. Could be black walnuts, could be chestnuts, whatever, or by thinning existing woods and planting forages or grassland forbs and grasses inside the canopy of the woodland to produce grazing forages. So we're either adding woods or trees to pasture, or we're adding pasture to the woods, and that is silvopasture. But it's highly managed, highly rotational grazed, and you're managing 3 different types of commodities. You're managing the livestock, you're managing the forage on the understory, and you're managing the trees. So as we look at a woodland setting, tree selection is very important. And we look at use tree selection methods similar to crop tree thinning practices. So you pick out your crop trees, that your most valuable trees in your woodlands, and then you thin out most of the rest. So you want to reduce the overstory tree count per acre. A residual basal area is reduced. And then you want to consider asking a DNR forester or consulting forester to take an inventory of your woodlands or take a timber cruise of your woodlands and forest and identify these top producing valuable trees that you want to protect in your woodlands. And then trees in the pasture, tree tubes, electric fence, electric wire can be used to separate the livestock from the trees being grown or planted. Obviously, they're very young, so they need to be protected from rabbits and deer predation, and obviously cattle if you're grazing that particular location in silvopasture opportunity. Could be from sheep or goats or cattle or other livestock. Silvopasture is an accepted practice in the Southeast and Northwest United States, and not widely accepted in the Midwest, but Midwest farmers have and value trees and pastures and graze woodlands. So it's important that they understand this practice, and certainly there's valuable resources available to learn more about silvopasture in the Midwest. A couple examples, here's a orchard down in southeastern Minnesota that actually grazes their hogs in a silvopasture setting through their orchard before and after the harvest of the apples. And then there's a chicken silvopasture operation around hazelnuts near the Twin Cities. Sheep can be involved in a silvopasture operation, also goats in silvopasture. Certainly goats prefer probably more woodies than vegetative plants on the ground, but certainly can be used in a silvopasture setting. And also goats can be used in special applications for buckthorn removal or invasive species removal and goats in woodland management. And there are obviously contract goat managers that can be hired to manage your woodlands for invasive species. There's a wealth of information at some of these nonprofit organizations. We have a great organization, Sustainable Farming Association in Minnesota, that has a wealth of information in agroforestry and silvopasture. And I think we'll have these websites for you later, or Nikki will send those out to you. Also, we have a newly formed silvopasture learning network. And actually, if you want to learn more about silvopasture, we urge you to contact our website here, silvopasture.umn.edu, and then sign up for our silvopasture learning network. In summary, agroforestry means clean water, air, safe and healthy food, abundant wildlife, beautiful places, clean, renewable energy, sustainable family farms and ranches. So here we have a picture of alley cropping in the base lower left of the screen. We go up to the riparian forest buffers, a bioenergy buffer that can be harvested for bioenergy. Down in the lower right, we have forest farming, windbreaks, silvopasture, and even short rotation woody crops. So agroforestry practices can be put on many different farms. Almost every farm in the country could have some type of agroforestry practice, and probably usually does, especially windbreaks is a very common practice. Just wanted to go through a few different websites of resources before Eric begins his talk on other financial resources for agroforestry. Here's the Center for Agroforestry out of the University of Missouri. And we do have this website certainly available later. The USDA has a National Agroforestry Center at Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a very great site for not only resources, but you can order for publications for other meetings. If you have groups of people meeting, these are free publications available to the public. The Savannah Institute that Eric belongs to has a great infographics on all the 5 practices of agroforestry. I urge you to go to that website and download them. They're great. And you can ask for them to be a hard copy sent to you as well. We have a professional organization and we like farmers and producers to belong to it as well. The Association for Temperate Agroforestry in North America here, and it covers Mexico to Canada and United States. And then I just wanted to plug our University of Minnesota Extension website and agroforestry. We have a lot of different resources that are available to you that you can download or order. This is a silvopasture BMP for Minnesota that you can basically from the stage 1 to stage 5 basically tell you how to get involved in silvopasture. So that's available on our website. Again, putting the right plant in the right place for the right purpose. 5 practices of agroforestry: windbreaks, silvopasture, riparian buffers, forest farming, and alley cropping. And I can show this later of our emails for Eric and myself, but I think I'm going to stop sharing screen now, and Eric can begin.
Great. Thank you, Gary, for that great information. And yes, I will be sending an email with all the links that you mentioned after the presentation. Before we get to our next presenter, I want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, and I see some of you are already typing it, which is great, please feel free to use the chat box, which can be found below. We will have a question and answer session at the very end of the presentation. So our next presenter today is Eric Hagan, who is a farm director for the Savannah Institute. Eric has an extensive background of farm management, conservation, farm planning, extension program coordination, and research on agroforestry systems for enhancing ecosystem services throughout the United States. He will add to the conversation the types and availability of technical and financial support to landowners and operators. And so Eric, feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Nikki, and thank you so much, Gary, for introducing all of this and having us. As Nikki said, I'm Eric Hagan with the Savannah Institute. We are a small nonprofit, actually not so small, we're a growing nonprofit, we're getting quite large, based in the Midwest, Illinois and Wisconsin primarily at the moment. And we focus on agroforestry adoption and development. We primarily focus on research and education, as well as demonstration. So we are actually farming agroforestry systems, working on tree crop breeding and development, and developing a whole slew of educational resources and outreach opportunities for landowner engagement. As Gary mentioned, you can find a lot of our information on our website, we host a lot of webinar series, as well as a perennial farm gathering, which just happened a few weeks back. And I hope that you guys can all connect to us after this event today. So today I'm going to focus on some of the cost share programs that are associated with agroforestry. And in particularly, I'm going to focus on what the USDA cost share programs for agroforestry. Because there's so many different forms of cost share or support structures that exist, whether they're state-run or local agencies, land grant universities. They're so variable and so different based on your county, your municipality, even your neighborhood, your watershed. And what I'm actually hoping is that in this Q&A session, that there's some folks that are from the local network that can actually help provide a little bit more detailed resources on what's available locally. So I figured I would focus on just some of the bigger federal level programs, and mostly just to represent that there are support at the state and federal program or level for agroforestry development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mostly technical assistance and financial support that's available through the Farm Bill. And believe it or not, the USDA actually has a very rapidly advancing strategy around sustainable farming across the US. And in particularly has had a long run of support for agroforestry. And more in recent years has there been increasing awareness and implementation of agroforestry within the USDA programs, which is really exciting. A tremendous amount of resources come across and get disseminated throughout different regions and states for natural resource conservation and protection, but also enhancing, agricultural stewardship in rural communities. So the USDA has kind of developed this agroforestry strategic framework. This is actually the second one. The first one was released in 2011. The most recent one came out in 2019. And what it does is it really sets the course over the next 5 years of what are the priorities from the USDA and how do they ensure that agroforestry as a topic or as a system is getting its fair share within the programmatic developments throughout the various agencies that the USDA supports. So whether that's the U.S. Forest Service or Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency, all the land grant institutes, all the funding sources that they provide, making sure that agroforestry is a priority and something that's being outreached, something that engaging landowners in some way, some sort of education component, investigated, so researched is a huge priority within the USDA, particularly with the Ag Research Service is starting to focus a lot more on agroforestry systems and disseminating that through their outreach, and then integrating it within the USDA programs, but also through landowner adoption and land grant university programmatic adoption. So I can kind of go on all day long about what USDA programs are available. I got about 20 minutes here for a presentation. I could probably take a couple hours. So effectively what I'm going to focus on is just how these programs affect landowners directly. And I guess to back it up really quick, the USDA through this agroforestry strategic plan and the Farm Bill and the agroforestry within the Farm Bill, we've been able to secure a lot of resources for technical assistance, whether, again, that's the National Agroforestry Center or United States Forest Service or Nrcs, all these different agencies that are able to provide consultation and service or education outreach materials for getting agroforestry into the mind of the public and resources to the mind of the public, but also with grant funding. So there's a tremendous amount of resources devoted to farmers. I myself as a farmer have received grant funding for chestnut development, for different types of tree crop development, different kind of storage and processing facilities, different kind of systems approaches, whether it's organic or conventional farming, but how do tree crops work with livestock? There's a tremendous amount of resources to research and better enhance the knowledge around agroforestry that's specifically coming from within the USDA. And actually most of our research is coming from funding from the USDA at some shape, one way or another. So it's incredibly important to recognize that the USDA has done a tremendous amount and is continuing to do more, but a lot of that's going to come from more of you asking for it. We are a democracy. we need the people that are engaged in the local communities. We need the landowners, the farmers, to ask those that work for the USDA programs to better understand agroforestry. So it is a bottom-up approach. There is definitely a top-down approach, but because we're a democracy, we rely on all of you to enhance this as well. So this is kind of my goal, at least to make you guys aware that these programs are available. I'm not going to go into too many details because there's just too much to go through, but more so just how to ask for it. And so again, I'm primarily going to focus on how landowners, I'm assuming this group is primarily landowners, farmers, or those that work directly with landowners and farmers, and focus really on two of the USDA programs that provide direct cost share or financial and technical assistance to landowners. And again, believe it or not, the USDA, the government, is willing to pay you for trees. We're actually constantly looking for more landowners willing to engage in these programs. We have a lot of natural resource concerns, which I'll get into in a little bit, that we're looking to address, and trees and agroforestry systems are the best route forward for that. Like I mentioned, a lot of these programs directly tied towards landowner engagement are in cost share programs. So what cost share program means is essentially providing technical assistance. So like a consultant or an NRCS agent or an extension agent to come out and help you one-on-one describe some of your challenges on the farm and what you can do to resolve those challenges. But also financial payments to help you implement strategies or a plan with a number of approved strategies to resolve those challenges that you might be facing. And in particular, a thing that I want to stress is that with cost share programs, they are primarily focused on resolving natural resource concerns. So this is, preservation of our soil health or water quality or air quality or habitat and biodiversity. So all of these programs kind of go back, especially the ones I'm talking about today. Again, there's other USDA programs focusing on economics and rural development and community development and that sort of thing. But these cost share programs for directly enabling agroforestry onto private lands or even public lands is primarily focused on those natural resource concerns. So when you're engaging within these programs, it's something that is the number one focus. It's not just about planting trees so you can get chestnuts. It's really about planting trees so it has a multifunctional effect. It preserves the soil quality, it preserves the air quality, enhances carbon sequestration and biodiversity and all these things. And that's really the focus of the topic. But at the same time, the great thing about agroforestry is we can tweak the system so it's not just a tree standing in a field, but it's a tree that actually provides some sort of community support and economic value to the landowner as well. So again, because a lot of these cost share programs are focused on the natural resource concerns, they might not always directly pay you to implement agroforestry. But what they can do is set you up for a long-term agroforestry system. So they might not pay you to plant an apple orchard. It's an easy one to get to, but it can pay you to or help you to get to a place where you can put in a forested system that 20, 30, 40 years down the road, when that contract is over, can actually get you into a place where you are having some significant economic or other kind of value structure in place that might not have been the original priority. So I just want to bring that up right off the bat to make sure everybody's on the same page in that regard. So what's kind of unique about what's happening right now with agroforestry at the top of the conversation is that kind of current conservation approaches is very much about keeping farming over here and putting conservation over there, and there's not much mingling in between. But kind of how Gary kind of mentioned it earlier, agroforestry really is the integration of parts. It really is about how do we integrate tree crops or perennial systems into an annual cropping system or into a livestock cropping system, so that it isn't so much your problem areas are maintained over there and your conservation and your wildlands are over here, but it's really how do we bring the wild and the perennial systems in an organized, structured, well-engineered way together. So that's kind of the goal of where we're at with using cost share programs with agroforestry is getting it more on the landscape, but again, focusing on those natural resource concerns. So really it's about designing these systems, implementing these systems in a very selective and choice way so that they do resolve those natural resource concerns, the nutrient mitigation from runoff and erosion, or in heavy rain events where you get pesticide runoff or even pesticide drift, putting in windbreaks to kind of help prevent that, so that the agriculture inputs stay in place where they belong and where they're best utilized, and minimize their use because they're being more efficient in their use. So again, this is very much about integrating the parts. Kind of covered that already. Well, so within this realm of direct landowner assistance, I want to get at kind of two main programs. And again, this is very much oversimplification because at this point I have 15 minutes, a little bit more. But essentially there's two modalities, there's two agencies that are offering substantial programs that I think are important for landowners to consider. That's a Farm Services Agency, as well as a Natural Resource Conservation Service. And you will hear these acronyms constantly, FSA and Nrcs, and I might start using them accidentally, I'll try not to. FSA being Farm Service Agency and Nrcs being Natural Resource Conservation Service. So right off the bat, the Farm Service Agency is a phenomenal entity that provides a lot of financial assistance, less so on the technical assistance, so less so on the consulting design. Nrcs covers that for them, but more on the financial support through a number of programs. The major one for agroforestry systems or for these natural resource concern conversation is the Conservation Reserve Program or the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. And I'll get to that in a little bit more later. But the Farm Service Agency also provides a whole suite of loan and funding programs to help landowners buy land at an extremely low interest rate, or operational loans in order to start an agroforestry or a farm business, again, at an extremely low interest rate, around 1% to 2%. They help with crop disaster assistance programs. They're really a really incredible agency that's incredibly underutilized by a lot of farmers, especially beginning farmers, despite the fact that their resources are actually more geared towards them, especially in helping to purchase land, get into farming, or get these loans in order to help them start establishing some of these programs. So I strongly encourage you to look more into the Farm Services Agency and what they have to offer in your area. But again, going back to the land management, the agroforestry component, the Conservation Reserve Program is particularly a program that's focused on resolving issues in high erosion areas. And really what it is a program to remove cropland, which is technically the highest contributor of erosion, even though poor grazing management can, but removing an annual system and putting it into some sort of perennial system, whether that's, you might have heard the Wetland Reserve Program or the Grassland Reserve Program. These are all types of conservation reserve programs, but there's also where you can convert it into a forested system. And this is, Gary had mentioned the riparian forest buffer. The riparian forest buffer practice is oftentimes funded utilizing CRP or CREP, Conservation Reserve Program or Enhancement Program. The way this program works is you remove the land, a land base out of an agricultural system, and you put it into this conservation program, and you have it's a contract, typically 10 to 15-year contract, and you typically can renew it once or twice. So you can potentially go 30 years on this contract, and you actually get an annual rental payment based on the soil type. So same as like a soil type rental payment for a farmer, say $200 an acre a year, you might get $150 an acre a year from putting it into this conservation reserve program. Plus they would pay for all the trees and all the labor to it, into putting the practice in place and that sort of thing. And then once the contract's up, there's a hope that that system stays in place. However, we've actually found through research that 80% of these practices where it was converted from corn into a CRP was at the end of the contract period was reverted back to corn. So what we're hoping is that with agroforestry in place, with a little bit more flexibility and better, really about better design, selecting some of these edible species or these more economically viable species, that a CREP program might be able to get you the plants, get you the system put in place. You're going to have to wait that 10-year period anyways for a lot of these crops to be economically viable. And then once that contract period's over, you're maintaining that practice in place because now you're harvesting the fruits or the biomass from these crops that are doing the natural resource concern that you initiated. Now, this is a little fuzzy. We need to, I'm not necessarily promoting that you go and you plant a timber crop and you cut it down. That's absolutely not what this program is going to allow you to do. But there is the possibility that post-contract, when the landowner does have that program back in place, if we were to start designing the system to be a little bit more enhanced and a little bit more forward thinking, that we can make sure that practice stays on the landscape and is actually economically viable to the landowner after that 10-year payment program is over. So that's a little bit complex. I think this one, hopefully we'll get some more questions on. I can go into this program a little bit more all day. Honestly, I'm not sure I would entirely recommend this program for agroforestry right off the bat, because it is a removal of farming is what you're getting paid for. But it is an important one to think about, especially if you have a riparian zone or if you have an area of very high erosion soils and that sort of thing. It might be important for you to think about just for the natural resource concern elements of it. So, and again, that's for the Farm Services Agency. That's kind of their primarily land management program. But they do have a tremendous amount of opportunities for funding and loan programs for getting land and or agroforestry systems in place. If you had a good business plan and good business model to go ahead and get those loans. So I encourage you to look more deeply into that. Getting into the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or the NRCS, again, there's a whole suite of programs here, and I'm going to focus primarily on the green highlighted ones: the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program. And again, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they are the field technicians that are out in the field providing technical assistance, even for the Farm Service Agency, the CRP. They are the ones that are typically enrolling you in the program, designing your system, talking you through how to set it up. So the NRCS is really not just the boots on the ground, but the engineers in the office, the technicians that are really doing the good work on helping to figure out these programs. And these are the folks that really we should be engaging with, especially having the conversation with around implementing more agroforestry systems, because they're the ones that are going to talk to the state committees and talk to the state biologists and the state conservationists, and really start to get more flexibility in these designs to meet your objectives. And they, again, all of these folks are experts in what they do. So they really are good at giving you some good, solid conservation advice. Not so much on the economic thing. That's, again, not their role. Their role is very focused on the natural resource concerns. But the agroforestry approach really has us kind of playing this game where there's a balance between the two. And again, I think I should say that NRCS is with all of these programs, it's very different from state to state, but particularly with NRCS, because there is state-led committees that determine what practices are available in a state to state. So I'm going to talk a lot about Wisconsin programs. And we're really hoping that the work that we're doing in Wisconsin is going to help Minnesota to start adopting some of these programs. Minnesota is ahead of us in a lot of different ways, but Wisconsin is actually extremely advanced within the Nrcs programs, even on a national level. So we're really excited about this year to be launching some of these newer practices and hoping to engage more other states to make that happen. But again, the reason why I keep bringing up your role in this is a lot of this comes from landowners asking for it. So again, this is just to get you aware of some of these programs. Real quick, the Conservation Stewardship Program is when you're a good steward, you're going to get more. One of the challenges with these cost share programs is they tend to incentivize landowners that have problems or are doing things in a way that are leading towards problems. They have challenges on their site that need to be resolved, and we have resources to help them resolve that. But these programs are not very well set up for operators that are already doing really great things. And this is a big challenge that we have in order to kind of help equally disseminate those resources. But again, the purpose is natural resource conservation. We have to go where the natural resource concerns are at. But this is where the Conservation Stewardship Program really comes in, and it really incentivizes engagement with landowners that have already done a number of NRCS programs or have done CRP with the Farm Services Agency and are needing a little bit more support to do more after those contracts are up. So this is a really fantastic program. There's a lot more flexibility in some of the what are called enhancements, not practices. They're enhancements, so enhancing on a practice that's been done. And so this is a place where good actors, good apples can get a little bit more help in, particularly in the technical assistance realm, where the NRCS can come out and help them to kind of enhance their agroforestry system one step forward, or even go from the other practice might be a good grazing plan. Well, the Conservation Stewardship Program might help them to get that grazing plan now into windbreaks and silvopasture. So with the natural resource concern addressed, the CSP program can really help to kind of take it one step forward to get agroforestry on the ground if you weren't able to get it on the ground from the beginning. And this is particularly relevant for landowners that have already done these programs when agroforestry wasn't allowed or approved. And now that they are allowed and approved, CSP might be a good avenue for you. Oh boy, I must really hurry this up. So the Environmental Quality Incentives Program is the last program, the EQIP. You probably have heard EQIP a lot. This is really where NRCS shines in their technical and financial assistance. This is where they directly engage with landowners in developing a conservation farm plan or conservation activity plan. This is where you get funding for working with a consultant to get grazing management plans. This is where a lot of the practices are housed and primarily where landowners first interact with federal cost share programs, where there's a whole suite of practices that are allowed. And again, this is where the field reps have worked directly one-on-one with you with developing a plan to resolve natural resource concern that works with your operation and lists a whole suite of practices that are fundable and allowable as part of the cost share program to incentivize you to plant these systems. The big one that's new in Wisconsin that's been approved and we're actually starting to develop contracts on is alley cropping. As Gary kind of eloquently talked a lot about what alley cropping is. So this is hugely fantastic to actually be able to plant economically viable trees into corn and soy fields or grain fields and pasture systems. So typically with these tree planting systems, you're focusing on native species only, not improved genetics, but alley cropping systems allow you to actually plant improved genetics. So this is a huge win. As I understand it right now, it's only approved in Wisconsin, but I think we can quickly get it there in other states if you guys start asking for it. Silvopasture is the other big, it's also very controversial, but Wisconsin did approve it. Right now it's limited to just pine plantings within a pasture system. Missouri also, I should mention, Missouri has gone through a lot of this already and has a tremendous amount of resources on a lot of this, but and they're a little bit more advanced than Wisconsin is on the silvopasture. But we're hoping over the next year or two that we're going to have a lot more flexibility in the silvopasture program. But either way, it's really exciting to be able to plant economically viable trees within a pasture system. It's such a win-win for everyone there. Riparian buffers, Gary mentioned a lot about this, and this is, again, a great step for CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program. And windbreak and shelter belts is another important practice that's used constantly throughout the Midwest. And another one I want to bring up is a typical one that's not typically used for agroforestry, but one that I think we should start discussing more often is just tree shrub planting. This is typically used for planting tree shrubs in, say, reed canary grass fields where nothing else would grow except an invasive, or replanting a forestry stand that might be dealing with invasives. But you can actually use tree shrub establishment for planting native edibles into a field or into a field border. The tree shrub planting is actually the practice you use in windbreak and alley cropping, but it hasn't had the flexibility or the use by a lot of landowners and field reps that I think we could actually start engaging with now. And again, with these practices, there's a massive database of the practices that are associated with this, and things that are associated with agroforestry, like cover cropping and conservation cover, or hay and pasture planting, where you can actually plant the grasses and forbs and the pasture for the livestock, or cover crops for working with row crops, or fencing. All these different practices are important for the success of these systems. So I strongly encourage you to do your own research. There's a website link down here for what's called the EFOTOG, the Electronic Field Office Technical Guide, where you can find every single practice available by NRCS and really kind of educate yourself, especially when you're engaging with field reps. To really get involved in this process, reach out to your area, what are called NRCS field reps, or DCs, or district conservationists. You can look them up on your area website. Get in contact with them, tell them about your operation, tell them what you're interested in, and tell them what, and have them out to your site, and they'll start looking at, what resource concerns you might have, what things you might need in order to help your operation, start developing this conservation activity plan, start talking to you about some of the different programs that are available. And I encourage you to start doing this now. They start getting really booked up. Applications are on a rolling basis, but are due in October. But it's really important that you start this process now if you want to start doing anything within the next year. Savannah Institute has a cooperative agreement with NRCS, so we can actually help develop these plans. More importantly, we can also, if you are working with a DC that's not familiar with agroforestry, they can call me and I can help work with them on developing and designing the agroforestry system. So at any point in time during the conversation, you can feel free to mention me and our it's called a cooperative agreement with NRCS, that we could help work with that field rep in order to get you what you're interested in, if you're interested in agroforestry systems. So I'm sorry I took up most of the time there, and I will stop sharing my screen, and hopefully we can get to a few questions.
Great, thank you, Eric, and also Gary, for speaking with us today. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and then also please take the survey that I will be sending in an email to you guys later. So I will moderate the questions. We may not be able to get to them all. I see that Gary has been answering a few of them, but I'll ask them again out loud for people who are on the phone and who may not be able to read the chat box. So I'll start with the first one. So do black walnut trees have an herbicidal output from their roots that kills off competing plants?
The answer to that is yes. You're right. They do, although it doesn't affect all the plants. And I did put something into the chat that actually, I think it's a list of plants that it does not affect. So you can certainly plant those plants. I think we have in University of Minnesota, we have the publications called, what is it, 30 tough sites, plants for 30 tough sites, I think it's called. And you can look at that information there. But you're right. It does have allelopathic type qualities given in the root system and given in the soil that doesn't allow certain plants to grow very well around black walnuts for a long time.
Maybe. Yeah, to quickly add to that, the chemical is called juglone, and it does, like Gary, I'm really glad Gary shared with you the resource. I think most people are often surprised at how few plants it actually does influence and affect. So there are tremendous opportunities for black walnuts that kind of go beyond the old school knowledge. I mean, I've seen timber stands of black walnuts cut down prematurely because someone wanted to plant an apple orchard, 500 feet away, and there was concern about juglone. It is in the leaves, but it actually does not impact things as much as we once thought. Actually, some new research too is actually showing that juglone is definitely affects some things, not denying that, but a lot of times it's actually water competition that's influencing what people are actually looking at. That walnuts are very good at surface level roots and are actually out competing other plants for water. So it's very much site specific. It's very much what kind of soils you have, what kind of water resources you have, and what kind of companion system you're planting. I think you're going to find that you can get away with a lot more systems with black walnuts than we once thought.
Great, thank you guys. Could you also touch upon black locust and maybe honey locust? Do they have similar chemicals?
Right, black locust, I'm not familiar with as much as black walnuts, but I think black walnuts have been used in Europe for biomass. It's considered in some states, black locust, as an invasive species in our North American states. So it will look down upon with the DNR and so forth if you start planting black locust. I know on the East Coast, black locust is used in maybe some silvopasture areas as well for foribs, but yeah, in the Midwest here, I'd refrain from black locust actually. Eric, you probably have something on that.
Yeah, sure. Both of those species are incredibly valuable in an agroforestry context. But Gary's right. From an NRCS perspective, I got that hat on now that I just talked about cost share programs. We would definitely not plant black locust because of its highly invasive nature to it. But again, it's incredibly valuable as a pollination tree, as a coppice tree. It's probably one of the densest woods we have in the U.S. And the hardiest wood, so it's great for organic trellising for, say, hops or berry structures, kiwi structures, and those sorts of things. So it's got a lot of market value for its timber, especially as a clonal. But honey locust, I want to bring up, is incredibly valuable especially for silvopasture systems, especially if you could find a thornless honey locust that is meaty and juicy, that grows in northern climates, which hopefully Savannah Institute is going to be working on. But there are, I wouldn't say cultivars, but there are some selections that are available that are doing really well in zone 6 and 5, having a bit more of a challenge in zone 4 and 3 for the succulentness that livestock prefer. It's definitely invasive because they seed out quite well, but not as much as black locust. And again, it's a really great tree, especially for a silvopasture context. And I can go on wax poetically about those species. I happen to really enjoy them. But you have to do it with some caution. How about that?
Sounds good. And we're a little over, but just one more question. How do you find markets for biomass?
I did enter some of the website on the Midwest Biomass Exchange. That's probably a good start. There's probably not a lot of biomass markets right now because of the low price of oil and energy, but yeah, you could keep your eyes open. Eric, you may want to comment on that too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. University of Iowa has done extensive research on biomass with poplar and willow, and especially in a similar context with what they're doing with corn and sort of refining it into a multitude of byproducts with tremendous resources. I mean, like willow and poplar can outcompete corn in a lot of ways in terms of biomass and byproduct nature. But the cost is not there. And especially with oil prices in the current kind of global energy market and the state of where things are at, it's kind of taken a very big backseat. Yep. So I would encourage maybe not large scale planting. There's some big research happening at SUNY, Syracuse University in New York, and some good government programs that are looking into it and trying to make it work with some progress. But I think biomass plantings right now are really good for kind of on-farm resource for say wood chips, or what you might need for you build yourself a gasifier or something like that. Particularly if you're planting them in, say, a grass waterway or a riparian system where you have a nutrient mitigation issue you're trying to resolve. That would be something to really think about from a natural resource perspective. The market might not be there, but you might be harvesting a good storage of nutrient along your riparian system that you can actually bring back up into the landscape. Particularly phosphorus. If you have a lot of phosphorus in your soils next to a riparian zone where they tend to aggregate, planting willow and poplar there, sequester it up, move it back up in the landscape can help long term. But again, economic viability is a bit challenged.
Yeah. If you want to email both Eric and myself, we'll send you more information on biomass. That'd be good.
Yeah, and I can provide the emails with a follow-up email that I'll be sending in a few hours. So I think those are all the questions for today. And that concludes our webinar. So thank you both, Eric and Gary, for speaking with us. And yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Well.